This is Synopsis, a series of conversations in the framework of Abeceda Institute. My name is Neža Zupanc, and today with me is Trinity Hlynn Prater. Welcome, and thank you for taking your time. I would kindly ask for a short introduction.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Trinity. I'm a composer. I work with acoustic instruments as well as electronics, as well as the two of them together. And I've been composing for about 5 years, but I've been a musician for, we'll go ahead and say, the majority of my life.
Mm-hmm. Where did you start? Which instruments?
I started taking piano lessons when I was 11, but the musical contexts were around before then. I grew up in a Christian religious environment, and there was singing twice a week growing up. And although that's
choir?
kind of a choir setting, it was this group worship setting, which was a cappella actually, and there was quite a few interesting contrapuntal choices that were made. These are all, people who are not professional musicians, but accomplishing some pretty interesting stuff. So that stuck with me even as my beliefs changed as I got older. But I started taking myself seriously as a musician for this career slash lifestyle slash whatever we want to call it. Probably around the time that I started my bachelor degree. I was a musical theater major. I was obsessed with a lot of drag and rock musicals like Rocky Horror Picture Show, Hedwig and the Angry Inch, Kinky Boots, and wanted to make that music and embody that space. But it turns out when you do a bachelor degree in musical theater, at least where I did it, they want you to do a bit more classic stuff, Rodgers and Hammerstein, this sort of thing. And so my senior year, I changed to composition. And this was a more pop music oriented degree. I often say that I learned a lot more about audio production and songwriting and this sort of thing during the bachelor. And then during my master degree, I came to the University of Iowa to study with Sivan Cohen-Elias, who is teaching electronic music here at the time. And fell in love with her music. I would often listen to it in my house when I was cooking and become inspired. And then I see, oh, who's her teacher? That's Haya Chernovin. I listen to her music and am enamored with it. Who are her teachers slash influences? And you see Brian Ferneyhough and Helmut Lachenmann, and who are these guys? And then this creates the feedback loop that leads to the obsessive relationship that I have with contemporary music today.
How do you think that influenced, and how do you see your practice, your own opus, in connection, in distinction, in relation to this lineage?
Well, of course, we're all these amalgamations of our experiences in many ways that we can be aware of and may not be aware of. For me, the influences are so granular. Like, I listen to a piece and I hear just a tiny little parameter of it that I think, oh, this is something that I could explore myself or add my own voice to. And then that becomes the subject of a part of a piece. I think granulation is actually a decent metaphor here, because I think of all of my pieces as a accumulation of all of these little grains together. And hopefully the grains are small enough that you don't really see them. You see the picture that they produce. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you have variable grain sizes across the image, I guess.
Curious. Also, the musical theater explains some of the video recordings that one can find of your works performed. It seems that some of the theater remained in the way you compose.
A little bit, and it wasn't always that way. There was a lot of theater music written when I was studying in Leipzig. I studied at the Hochschule für Musik und Theater there with Klaus Stefan Mannkopf for 2 years. And for whatever reason, during that time, I become very interested in the actions of the musicians on stage. And if there is any through line to the many stylistic and compositional changes, I have noticed very, very recently, this is a less than 3 days old discovery, that the music is in, or my music, it has been incredibly concerned with personhood, the ideas of what constitutes an individual, what kind of emotional lives or psychologies would one need to have to undergo certain actions? How do certain actions influence your ideas of yourself? Who do you become moment to moment under certain circumstances? And the strategy for exploring those questions when I'm writing pieces that are more theatrical is asking the question, what happens to the person when they are actively engaged in a ritual? Not necessarily a musical performance, though classical music performance or concerts are quite ritualistic in their own way. But actually engaging in some actions that have metaphysical, symbological meaning. And asking the question again, what happens to this person under these circumstances? Who do they become? And I'm now at a point where I'm wanting to explore those questions in a different parameter, but it makes sense with the theater background that, yeah, what acting is putting yourself in various situations, various personhoods, personalities, if you want to call them that, and seeing what you and your body do.
Why ritual? Why specifically ritual? When you speak of a concert, why, where do, via which route do you get to the ritual? Why is it important?
Yeah. Well, I think the religious upbringing certainly adds to the awareness of ritual, in that I was experiencing pretty intense, pretty detailed rituals twice weekly for the first 15 years of my life. And actually, the piece that I'm working on for Abeceda's current festival, Anthropodermic Bibliopegy, has several movement-based elements that come directly from my experience in these ritual settings. For example, in the group that I grew up in, there was no movement allowed during the music making process. Even though the sound of the music was quite revivalist and energetic, the body had to be completely still. And the way that you physically express excitement or passion or whatever is simply by standing up if you are able. And there will be a leader in front who sort of leads the standing up and the sitting down. And this is in the piece. The conductor, during moments that I feel are quite high energy musically, will direct the ensemble to stand up. And the parallel that I drew there was, yeah, in classical music, the traditional concert performance, excessive bodily movement is considered to be quite taboo. I remember during my bachelor degree, I was performing in a piano competition and my hair got in my face. And right before I was about to play a huge scale that finishes all the way at the piano, I'm so nervous. I'm going to mess up the scale. My hair is in my face. I can't even see the keyboard. So I do this, and then I play the scale. And this was seen as kind of a glamorous sort of performative action, even though I was just trying to get my hair out of my face. And I was brought up by the teachers. I wasn't reprimanded or anything, but I was told, yeah, this isn't what's expected when performing this style of music. So this is incredibly ritualistic, nearly religious.
Wow,
The connections are very clear, at least in my experience.
that's fascinating. Uh, since we are at an anthropodermic bibliopegy,
Yes.
and there's still further part of the title, which is way down.
Yeah, Waidan, which
Way
I'm
down.
sure I'm pronouncing terribly. This is a term related to Taoism. It translates to external alchemy. And this was a process of combining minerals, mostly red cinnabar, and consuming the resultant elixir. And the intention was that the potion would make one immortal. There's a complementary practice, Neidan, the internal alchemy, which is a bit more symbological and meditative, and the previous piece. So, Anthropodermic Bibliopegy is a series of 3 pieces. The piece before Waidan is this inner alchemy.
Elixirs?
Elixirs, yeah. There's the there's another portion of Taoist literature that's being referenced there, and I thought that the use of invoking the idea of elixirs again would be suitable, since the piece is about making potions so that you can live forever.
Can we really dive into this composition and then go from there further onto your opus wider?
Sure.
Since it seems very packed, and also since abeceda is preparing its performance now for April. I haven't heard it. I'm not in the ensemble for it, but I'm very curious what is going to sound there. Okay, you were talking about alchemy, about Buddhism, Taoism, pardon, and how do you get there when you compose? How does that enter your compositional practice? It's what is its place in this composition, and then further also to uh, the other categories of composition that you're working with in the framework of this piece.
Sure. I'll speak first about the role in the composition specifically, because the role of these things overall in my work and compositional process is always changing at the moment. And
Okay.
in this particular composition, the first metaphor that's being made is the idea of gathering materials and synthesizing them with some kind of transcendent intention. So in the case of Waidan, the external alchemy practice that I described before, this is a literal process of going out into nature and gathering materials. And the interesting thing about this process, or really any older alchemical process, at least that I've researched, is the way that you make predictions about what certain material combinations are going to do is incredibly specific and incredibly structured, and there are lots of rules, but it's also weirdly vibes based. It's a lot about the materials as symbols and the meaning that results from the interplay of those symbols. And the way that this piece was composed was, on one hand, literally similar. There were some parts of the electronics which are in the piece, which are from recordings of nature that I went out and gathered. There's crows squawking that I got from the Clara Zecken Park in Leipzig. There are recordings of rocks which I gathered at a river that had specific meaning to me. And I would record myself casting them or rubbing them together, or general tactile experimentation. So there's this literal going out and getting materials for the potion activity going on. But this is also very similar to the way that I composed this piece and the way that I was composing most of the anthropodermic bibliopegy pieces, where you have all of these musical parameters. Some of them may be ideas for a sound you want to hear, ideas for a situation you may want to experience. You have also the instruments themselves, the personalities of the people playing those instruments. And all of these can be seen as these sort of symbological materials, which, when brought into relationship with one another, is, well, we would hope that some kind of transcendence or something like spirituality would occur as a result of those combinations.
And at the same time, we're done gathering materials. It's something that also performers do, in a sense, only preparing for the performance of this composition, right?
Yes, and this happened for the first time in Neidan, the second piece of the series. In Neidan, the musician plays with pieces of wood that are found in the area around where they live, also stones. There's a piece of metal which is used. We used a guitar slide in the original performance, but you could find any piece of metal that you're comfortable putting on your string instrument. And that idea continues into Waidan, the piece that Ensemble Abeceda is playing. Each musician has a certain number of stones. I believe the violist, who's kind of at the center of this composition, has 7 stones with them, and then the other musicians have 2, a large one and a smaller one, and runes are drawn on the larger stone with the smaller stone. And the beautiful thing about this process is that the musicians can gather these materials in as in any manner that they wish. If you want to go to a hardware store and go to the place where they sell the stones for you to put on your lawn, you're more than welcome to do that. Or if you want to spend a weekend in a cabin in the mountains so that you can find just the perfect rocks or anything in between, this is also viable. And I would imagine, though this is me being kind of speculative, that the circumstances under which the rocks are gathered will change the musician's relationship to the instrument.
Curious. And perhaps to the composition, if I join the speculation.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Yes, you have to do extra work, unfortunately. Yeah.
Well, our extra I don't know, I don't find the expression, but extra practice, extra metaphysical categories that are present in the performance in the end. And what is happening with the viola? It's in the center here, in this bibliophagy as well as in one of the previous ones. It's only for viola. Is there a reason why viola?
So the decision, anthropodermic bibliophagy started as a desire to write a bunch of viola solo pieces with various accompanying ensembles. So the first inspiration was an instrumentation. And the first piece, which has not yet been performed, and I will probably rewrite significantly before it ends up getting performed, but this treated the viola in a very concerto-like role. The musician was at a table with the viola strapped to it, playing with various bows and implements. There were 4 speakers on each corner of the viola's setup, which were playing electronic processing of the activity going on the viola's table. And then there were 3 separate chamber ensembles sort of spatialized around the soloist. And this is a pretty typical hierarchical concerto setup where the viola is at the center and you have accompaniment. The second piece is a solo where I tried to treat the viola not very much like a viola at all. I rented a viola from the Hochschule in Leipzig, where I was at the time, and essentially wrote a piece that I could play. I'm a keyboardist, percussionist, and by and large, those are all sounds that I was capable of producing on the instrument. And then the opportunity to write the third one for abeceda came along. And so this is another situation where you have the viola and other musicians. And if we're thinking about concertos, this is a thing that's going to be noticed and needs to be handled. And so the viola is still at the center of the stage. They are in the middle of the ensemble, but they are walled off. They are concealed somehow. I believe the plan is to use tall music stands with sheets or something draped over them for this performance.
So may I interrupt with a
Yes.
question? So it's the ensemble that is concealed, not the viola.
No, it's the viola is concealed in the center of the ensemble.
I see. Okay, I see. Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Oh, it's a lot of detail.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed.
But so this is kind of an obvious circumvention of the concerto hierarchy, that the soloist is not visible, and you're not hearing a lot of very typical classical viola sounds. So it might be that the viola is not identified until we hear it enter as a viola, and this happens very strongly towards the end of the piece. But yes, maybe that's enough.
No, please, I think we have space to continue. Although, of course, I hope yeah, it doesn't spoil anyone's visit to the performance.
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so either. Concerto hierarchy. So because it is concealed, you're why this so I'm assuming this is then one of your interests as a composer, what to work with the historical ways of performance of composition. Is why what is interesting here for you?
So the first piece of mine that I wrote that was really thinking hard about the question of genre, especially as it relates to classical music, was a piano trio that I wrote while I was studying with Robert Morris. I had a very funny first lesson with him where I showed him a sinfonietta that I was working on, and he was very vulnerable and honest with me and said, a lot of the new sounds that you're using, they're kind of beyond my generation. I'm a 12-tone serialism guy. I don't know that I can speak very intelligently on what you're doing. And I said, this is wonderful. Let's not talk about my music. I am new to the discipline of classical music. At this time, I had been in the rock and roll / film music universe and had just transitioned to seeing myself as a composer of classical music. And I didn't feel that I had the same connection to the genre that friends of mine who played cello in orchestra from the time they were 6 years old might have had. So I asked him, can we start with Haydn and move forward? And it was through those studies that I ended up working on my piano trio, which has a similar, I guess there's a connection between the piano trio and the third anthropodermic bibliopegy, because the piano trio is for piano, contrabass, and cello, not cello and violin, as is the standard. So there's this theme of kind of using the genre as a setup. We're all coming into this concert where we're going to sit down and shut up and be quiet until the music is over, and turning those expectations, or all kinds of those expectations, on their heads in a sort of, I would say, cheeky way. I don't think that it's quite clever. It's kind of a humble nod at the fact that I'm a bit of an outsider. There's not as much of a shock to me to seeing a piece called Piano Trio for the wrong instruments. In the same way that there's not as much of a shock for me seeing a concerto that doesn't really have a clear star, a clear soloist, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what about the when you mention Haydn and probably more of the composers, if one takes a closer look at your work, is one able to find also those grains?
I wonder.
Curious.
Yes. I mean, I think that you can find grains of the tradition anywhere that it's that parts of it are being used. For example, in my practice, I'm usually using the Western European system of notation, especially for rhythm and often for pitch and other things as well. And with that comes the history. There are things that you can do in that notational system that come more naturally and therefore have been done more often. I would say that the piano trio that I just mentioned is probably the piece where you see the most direct influence of classical music, like, high classical, like Haydn and Mozart and these sorts of things. And that was mainly in the attention to form. A big thing that Bob Morris impressed on me when we were listening through all of these pieces was that these guys, especially Haydn, are humorists. They have this sort of structure, this expectation, the sonata form or the development of themes or whatever they're doing, and also expectations of the harmonic progression and so on. And they are following the rules, but not quite. And you just hear winking everywhere when you're listening to a Haydn piece. And I wanted to do a piece like that that applied those parameters mainly to the time and form dimension, where there's a lot of stopping and starting, a lot of finishing or behaving as though you are finished when you are not yet, and either starting back immediately or taking a break and letting another material come to the stage and then interrupting that material because they were not done yet. There was a
Which
lot.
composition are you speaking about?
The piano trio is
Piano
this.
trio. Okay, okay, cool.
There are moments of this in anthropodermic bibliopegy, but with those pieces, I wanted to challenge my instinct to work in this kind of modular way and instead create music that felt like every moment sort of rolls into the next moment, that we're not really hearing modules necessarily. We're hearing a single moment that's always changing. Sometimes the nature of the change can be very immediate. It doesn't always have to be interpolation, but that's more romantic, I would say. It's distinct from the classical sonatas and things that I was studying with Bob.
Mm-hmm. And apart from some sort of wittiness, do you implement form also in other ways, or how do you work with that?
Yeah. Humor is, of course, a huge part that I've mentioned. I had a friend who was a painter say to me, and she was not joking. She had a very severe face when she said this. I take humor very seriously. And I totally agree with her. I think humor is a quite serious and profound thing. But apart from that, this is something that I can't really explain so empirically. It has much more to do with my personal taste and inner experience. But there's something about remembering, something about things which return, which is incredibly emotional to me. These reminders that time marches on, regardless of whether or not you would like to flow with it. For whatever reason, this elicits a response in most people. And this is another form that the recurrence can take. I was watching a movie with a friend. I really wish that I could remember the name of it. Oh, it was called Asparagus, and I can't remember the name of the filmmaker, but it's an incredible animated movie. And the final scene, an asparagus grows out of the ground, and the protagonist comes, and this is the only time where we see any part of the protagonist's face, and we just see her from the nose downward, the nose and the mouth. And the mouth is placed over the asparagus and lifted, and every time the mouth is lifted, the asparagus takes a new shape. And I was watching this with my friend who'd seen it a few times, and so I was quite proud that I noticed this when she did not. And I said, the way that the asparagus is transforming, these are all things that happened before in the movie. These are scenes and images that were like focal points of various moments that she's bringing back to life with every coverage and revelation of this asparagus. And both of us were incredibly touched by that. And I love that we can't explain why.
Composition, I guess, and form in composition. So if we've now come through the, let's say, may I say, mysticism part or alchemy part through form, where would you stir the conversation next when speaking of your compositional practice? What is another aspect that you have as an important one in mind when you compose? Perhaps not for every piece, but something else, anything else.
Mm-hmm. I think the final thing after, so there's the mysticism and then there's the form focus that you mentioned, would be an idea of encoding, which is not my discovery that this is kind of important. A friend of mine was studying their PhD when I was studying my master's at University of Iowa, and wrote a very impressive dissertation about musical form in modernism after the war. And one of the central things that they bring up is that it seems that post-war modernism has a lot to do with encoding, that's the common thread that brings all of this together. Whether you are Grisey and you are encoding an analysis of sound spectra into harmonic and rhythm decisions, or you are Schoenberg and your or Elliott Carter is another example, and you are encoding all of these incredibly beautiful, complex mathematical structures into the harmonic decisions for the music. These are very distinct practices, yet they all end up under the modernism umbrella, and it would seem that their place under that umbrella doesn't have as much to do with the fact that it's all art music that not a lot of people listen to, and that it has more to do with the fact that they're encoding something into something else. So the alchemy is encoded into the composition. There are mathematical structures as well. I'm particularly fond of May's logistic map, the chaos function, and will sometimes use that to inform harmonic or rhythmic decisions. But the intention there is not to become sort of a computer-based or algorithmic composer, although I have a good relationship with that music and find it particularly beautiful. The theme is, again, there's this very odd instinct of the artist to take a thing from the world and find a way to infuse its traits into the work. And I'd say this is probably the most fundamental trait of what I do, that even, if the esoteric interests fade, if the theatrical interests fade, there will always be encoding going on somehow.
And for example, you've addressed that in the on the case of bibliopegy, right?
Yes.
Can you provide more cases where you do that? And I imagine these cases are very, very different amongst each other. So what would be another example of that in your opus?
So I'd say that all three anthropodermic bibliopegies are the strongest, sort of most obvious case of this happening. The other pieces, a great example would be the Sinfonietta that I that made Robert Morris decide to only speak about Haydn with me, said lovingly. But this piece was called Hexenacht, which translates to Witch's Night in English. This is a observance that's been held throughout northwestern Europe for hundreds of years. It's held on the day that Saint Walpurga was canonized, and she was known for her battles against witchcraft. And many witches, especially women, or even people who were not witches but were simply accused, were killed in the name of this observance. And the way that it's celebrated now is by burning a straw effigy of a witch. And it's fun, but the history is problematic because the history is always problematic. Well, a contemporary observance of this festival is by the satanic temple, this atheistic Satanism religion that follows after Anton LaVey. They celebrate Hexanacht as well, but it's celebrated as a solemn holiday of remembrance. I believe the wording on their website is a solemn holiday in remembrance of those who were victimized by superstition. So I have this story circulating in my head of this holiday and what it means, and it's my own relationship to it. And I look for various chants or songs that were sung by witchcraft practitioners during the time where Saint Walpurga would have been active, and much earlier. These are very ancient practices. I believe I found five, because they were quite short melodies. And I transposed each of them in some relationship to each other. It was quite intuitive, ugly intervals like half steps and tritones and so on. And my pitch material for that piece was cycling through pieces of those melodies. The first note of melody 1, the first note of melody 2, the first note of melody 3, second note of 1, second note of 2, second note of 3, and so on. So this is very direct. It's going straight to the culture that I'm engaging with, and finding a way to infuse it into the music, but also kind of conceal it as well. This is a theme of the encoding, is going back to the tiny grain sizes that we opened this interview with. My hope would be that things are encoded in such a way that they are transformed into a novel experience, rather than it being kind of a pastiche or patchwork kind of situation, though patchworks are gorgeous as well.
And with this on the table, when it comes to performance, what do you consider as how do you treat once the score, the composition, once you have composed it? What is important to you in performance of your compositions?
Well, the most important thing for me is the involvement of the musicians who are interpreting the work. This is a big reason why I compose for instruments that I cannot play, as well as for electronics. Is there seems to be a really big part of the work for me, which is engaging with people and passing on the text to other people. And it's a really interesting how the performance practice of classical music changed over the 20th century. If you listen to old recordings of the late Romantics playing their own music on the piano, it does not sound like what was written down at all. There's a lot of pushing and pulling of the tempo. There's a lot of embellishment of the figures. And then something happens after the war where we start to value this incredibly accurate and precise interpretation. The way that I've described it is under these expectations, Mary Had a Little Lamb is impossible to play, because if you're just 1 hertz too high or too low, or if you're just a millisecond too early or too late, by the standards of the pedagogical practice, you are wrong, and you need to practice and fix that. This is very interesting and has resulted in a lot of really beautiful art and music being made. But it's also something that I personally would find quite stressful to involve myself in. So I really, really cherish the moment that occurs when the score is passed from myself to the musician. And then they are the ones who are speaking to me about the music, and I am making changes based on what they are saying and feeling and experiencing. Um, so there is something missing in my work when that process is not there.
I see. Interesting. And what experience do you have when in this process? How much does the composition still change at that point? If if it does change indeed.
Well, the anthropodermic bibliopegy pieces were sort of intended to be capable of radical change from musician to musician while still being a composed text. So the score for the solo piece, the Nedan, the second one, is has a very free rhythmic notation, but it's still figured. There's a system of enlarged fermatas that show the approximate length of a phrase, and then within that, spatial rhythms are to be interpreted individually by the performer. This is not something that I invented. Also, it works with a tablature, which is incredibly open. There are instructions for the approximate position of the finger and the bow on the string, but it's not as precise as Produce for Me A at 440 hertz. And the third piece uses this as well, but in the larger ensemble setting, which I'm very interested to hear, that the musicians have to play from full score, because in these moments you cannot rely on the clock that the conductor gives you. It's entirely based on the musical moment, the gesture or the texture of it. And of course, there will be variability and individuality in that expression. And I did have a period which has come up until quite recently, where I was working with incredibly complex rhythmic notation. And you would think that this would be the opposite, that this is the antithesis of the freedom of spatial notation. But one of the things that drew me to it was this reality of the impossibility of our performing practice standards in this tradition. That the thing that happens when the musician is confronted with something that's so impossibly, ridiculously impossible that they're never going to be able to play it, and we underestimate the limits of our performers. So when I say I wrote something impossible, I mean I wrote something not possible or impossible, except for a select few very special individuals. What happens when a musician starts to interpret that kind of music is individuality, is expression. You know, the tension and release, going in and out of incredibly high energy, difficult passages, and incredibly low energy, more rhythmically easy passages. I'm not so married to that idea now. I don't use it very much, but still the intention was consistent with what I'm doing in anthropodermic bibliopegy and other pieces, which is to essentially bring the interpreter, allow the interpreter to bring themselves to the piece.
Mm-hmm. And since we are at interpretation, do you still perform? Do you perform some of your own compositions on piano as well?
I have when necessary.
Yeah.
I also, when I was in Rochester, I played a few premieres in ensembles as a percussionist. And I play a lot now. I'm frequently on concert travel, but it's for rock bands and this sort of thing. So, and this is consistent with my practice and my experience. I did the classical concert piano thing in my bachelor degree, and then when it was no longer necessary for my studies, I stayed a gigging, blues combo type of musician.
So also percussion in the rock bands?
In this formation, I'm mostly playing keyboards and synthesizers, but I've been a drummer for some punk and country and folk bands. Yeah.
Curious. Okay, now to more to the future of plans in compositions, of aspirations, of where you see you want to stir the compositional practice that you do.
I'm at a very beautiful period to be answering this question, because in both the compositional life as well as the personal life, I am in transition at the moment. And we would hope that during the transition, we are enamored and inspired by the potential possibilities of the future rather than depressed and intimidated by them. But of course, life is complex and we can hold both. But I recently, so I'm in the US now after having spent 2.5 years working as a composer and studying in Germany. And when you move as a composer, we're kind of trained to think about our eras geographically. I think we get that from studying Bach and the different music he writes in different cities or stories like that. And so I'm thinking a lot about the Germany music, and this is where the concern with personhood observation comes up. That there is a lot of thinking about identity in this music. The way that I would describe it anecdotally without necessarily talking about the music itself. So the complexity interest. I was not, I'm being very open and vulnerable to say, I was not going to the music library and looking at scores or reading, analyses of Ferneyhough pieces to understand the technicalities of the way this music is made. I was speaking with individuals to try and understand the psychology of the sort of person that would make this kind of music. And there's a lot of brilliant discoveries made there, but I would say that they have their limitations. I find that I'm much more satisfied with my music when the sound material is coming from a place of pure sensual impulse. What kind of sounds do I want to hear? That the psychological and personhood issues, for me, don't tend to be great fuel for that parameter of the composition. It's amazing fuel for inspiration. We have to call the piece something. It can be a great connection to titles and program notes, and even for ideas about structure and time and what happens. But sound is not linguistic. It can convey information, but it cannot convey information so specific as language can. And you need language to have identity the way that we have it and talk about it. And I'm very excited now to delve into this non-linguistic space and just explore the things that I find beautiful, the kind of sounds that I want to hear, the ways that I want the air to touch me. I think that's what that is what you get the highest benefit out of in life, is concerning yourself with those things.
Curious. And I bet that also resonates, in the music itself when listened to. I'm looking forward to hearing the composition in April. Since we are now slowly approaching the conclusion, I would like to ask you for two messages for our listeners. One for any aspiring composers, knowing that you are as well a composer in development, but nevertheless. And the second one for anyone that will go and listen to your music, perhaps online, perhaps live in one of the upcoming abeceda festivals or elsewhere.
Sure. Well, to aspiring composers, I will first say welcome. If you are an aspiring composer, you're already a composer as far as I'm concerned, and we are a small community, so every new member is noticed and appreciated and enthusiastically received. And apart from that welcome, I would say do not get confused. Your life is the composition. And I mean that both in this way that the circumstances of yourself and your life will affect the musical decisions that you make in the pieces, but in a much more utilitarian way. When the relationships and the physical health and the mental health and the personal stability, when all of those things are in a rhythm where you can kind of expect what's going to come from them, not perfectly, but it's moving, you have so much more space to pay attention to what we all actually care about, which is this amazing, beautiful, strange music. I get so much more benefit from focusing on these sonic beauties than from stressing about myself or whether I'm any good or whether, the music is going anywhere. So this is my message, is to pay attention to those things. And for anybody who wants to listen to my music on my SoundCloud or YouTube or whatever, first of all, thank you for listening. And second of all, good luck. It confuses me. I can only imagine how it would for somebody else.
Trinity Hlynn Prater, thank you very much.
Thank you.